always say that putting on a conference like this is kind of like diving in a river, right? And you start in the morning and you hop in, and sometime later in the day you're going to come out. And our next speaker is somebody who's been in lots of rivers and has always come out on the other end and is helping a lot of other Iowans think about our rivers and streams, and that's Molly Hanson from Iowa's Rivers Revival.
Okay, after lunch slot, all right. Woo, everybody awake, caffeinated, fed. I think Neil does this on purpose to me, but that's okay. My name is Molly Hanson. I'm the Executive Director of Iowa Rivers Revival, and thank you very much for having me today. I feel like I get to be your afternoon pep, so I'm going to try really hard to fulfill that role for you, but also because I have the privilege of getting to talk about a lot of really exciting things that are happening right now around rivers. And so we're going to be the optimistic and excited part of the day here. So, yeah, woo! Everyone get excited. Okay, I wrote a smiley face right on the top of my notes. This is how we're getting started. So a little bit about Iowa Rivers Revival. For those of you who have not heard of us, we're a 501c3 nonprofit river advocacy group for the state of Iowa. And I think Joe mentioned we're at about 72,000 miles of interior rivers and streams in Iowa. And so every single one of you grew up with one in your backyard or very nearby. And so there are a lot of corny and cliche things I'm going to be able to say about rivers connecting all of us, and you all get to participate in that with me today. So the awesome part about this is that really, really exciting things are happening for rivers in Iowa. And so that gives me the opportunity to talk about things that are going on at Iowa Rivers Revival, and also how this weaves into a lot of the things that we've spoken about today. Because whereas most towns and communities grew up around rivers and have a culture and a history of the river or stream that they're on, a lot of us have lost some of our connection with rivers, or our identity as a community or as a town with rivers. Des Moines may have some big ones that you've heard of. They're called the Des Moines and then the Raccoon. They're very important. So who lives in Des Moines? Okay, great, a few of you. So on average, about 500,000 people very daily utilize those rivers, right? So has anyone drank water today? Great, okay, all right, see, we're all connected. So river restoration is something that our group has been working on for a long time. And you know, when we talk about farming, when we talk about soil health, when we talk about community, really environmental issues, rivers, I think, are going to help kind of tie in all of those, and they're going to help us do it in a way that's really fun and engaging. My board gets sick of me because sometimes we get into really technical discussions and I say things like, no one cares. And so I want to make sure that whatever we talk about today, we don't feel tempted to follow up with, nobody cares, right? We all care. This is a room full of people who super care, and that's so, so important. But we have to make sure that whatever messages that we take away from today, we make relevant for everyone else in our lives, right? Not everybody knows about soil health or stream bank stabilization techniques with native plantings, which I will be happy to talk with you about, right? They don't necessarily deal with that on a daily basis. And so figuring out how what we do is relevant to people and their daily lives and our communities and our neighborhoods is extremely, extremely important. And so my challenge to you today is to take what you've learned and figure out how to make that relevant to your community, to your family, to your neighbor, to your friends. And I'm going to give you a few tips to help you do that. So Iowa Rivers Revival has been working on river restoration as a concept for a long time. And when we talk about a natural resources potential, I believe our vision statement is something that really speaks to what we have for that. So the vision of Iowa Rivers Revival is clean, free-flowing Iowa rivers, teeming with life, surrounded by diverse landscapes, and connecting vibrant communities. That would be my natural resource potential, right? That's what we're trying to have. And for us, I think in Iowa, and especially in Des Moines, it's a re-identification of who we are and what we want to do. So rivers are multifaceted, ever-moving, slightly misunderstood, sometimes feared, but they are for all of us. And they are there for us to rediscover. And I think this group of people can also help other people. So Neil wanted us to break down a few different things about the roles that different people can help us play. And we're going to talk about rivers. But when you think about rivers, this could be a stream, a creek, the mighty Mississippi, all of those things. And we know that they're feeding into it. So first question we have to start with, I know this has been mentioned today, but nobody made us actually define it. Who knows what watershed they live in? Okay, all right, excellent. I gave it away a little bit earlier, so you can all use that as an example, but we all live in these watersheds, and so that's going to connect us. So the first thing, when you're talking about, your name, where you're from, your zip code, your watershed is part of that, and that can be an identity piece for everyone, for communities, for landowners. Start with it as, at parties when you're introducing yourself to people. So first thing we're going to talk about is landowners and individuals. Now, we had a great comment. A woman named Jen Riggs came to our Women for Water conference last year, and she raised her hand and she said, okay, so who here has some affiliation with a farm, right? They grew up on a farm, or they were raised near a farm, or their family might have owned a farm at some time. Okay, so who has some sort of a background in farming in Iowa? Who? Yeah, I do too. Okay, great. Okay, now we're all in Des Moines at a university at a conference today. So we have just officially debunked the myth between the urban and rural divide, right? We literally did it today. All of us together. Yay! Okay. So that's part of one way that we can, make these conversations a little more pleasant. So when we talk about landowners, often in my line of work, we talk about water quality, and often those conversations can get a little bit contentious. Sometimes finger pointing happens, and often those city folks in Des Moines, are being accused of potentially, being hard on farmers or not getting along with their rural community members. No, we know this is simply not true. So my philosophy is that everybody can do a little bit better, right? So what is the role of landowners and individuals for rivers? Well, my board member, Robin Fortney, likes to talk about what is a river steward. And I'm glad other people have used that word today, so we don't have to define it. You know what a steward is, and if you don't, you can just pretend at this point. Another way of saying that is that we can all do better. So if our watersheds are connected and we can figure out how to collaborate, use teamwork, talk about the different things that we have going on, and realize that a one-size-fits-all model is not going to be happening, then we can start to make progress, right? So if I if I have a yard and I want to put in a rain garden or a rain barrel, that's me doing a little bit better, right? If anyone's familiar with Camyar and Cheyenne's program, right, we're working with parks and communities to cut down on their spraying of harmful chemicals. That's something that we can do, or you can encourage your local parks to do. If you're a landowner and you're interested in putting in conservation practices, it sounds like there's a lot of people in this room who can help you and give you very important suggestions about that. So each of us can do part of that. And I'm going to again, and I know we've been emphasizing this, the watershed management authorities that are growing around Iowa and fully supporting our watershed management coordinators is going to be a huge piece of this, right? So landowners can install conservation practices, pollinator gardens, buffer strips, rain barrels. It's really endless as to what we can do. But I would say, because this topic was landowners and individuals, the most important thing you can do is go outside. And take kids outside. And then take your friends outside and keep going outside. Because we're in this cycle of disconnect from a lot of our natural resources that we're talking today. So, there could be a lot of people in this room who have experience with farms and natural resources, but there could be a lot of people that you interact with on a daily basis that don't, right? They don't identify with a natural resource. They don't identify with a farm community. So how do we give them a positive experience with the resource that will then help them along the road to caring about it, right? I used to be in environmental education, and so the best thing that ever happened was when you take a kid out and give them their first experience, right? So maybe it's the first time they've ever been out on a river, or the first time they've dug a red worm out of a compost kit, or whatever it is, to give them that aha moment. They're not going to care about something if they've never had a positive experience with it. So one thing that we can all do if we have a love and a passion for something is to connect people to that resource. So take kids outside, take your friends outside, and go experience your local creek and your local river. The role of the government. Okay, so water quality has been a very sensitive subject around up at the Capitol under the Golden Dome occasionally. And we all know that, you know, water quality can be handled in a lot of different ways. It can be communicated in a lot of different ways, but we all said that we're in Des Moines and we drank water today. So we have all participated in some level of coming together around water quality today. The role of the government is to protect their citizens, and we have a lot of opportunities to do good things about that. And one of the things that we've talked about today that I think is really important is supporting these services, right? So we need to fund our Department of Natural Resources. We need to fund our public universities. We need to be able to have these institutions of science and learning and research to be able to do these things. Because then when I want to do an economic impact about recreational use on streams and rivers in Iowa, I have, you know, students and professors who want to go do that research to let people know that we're going to generate hundreds of thousands of dollars around rivers due to recreation coming up in Iowa. So we're going to talk about a lot of the cool projects that are going on, but the role of the government is to be able to give citizens these opportunities and these experiences, right? So everything from supporting citizen science to conservation practices to watershed management authorities to monitoring and all these different programs. Now we say this is the role of the government, but I do a lot of advocacy workshops and I think it's the role of us, right? So if we all are constituents of individuals, local levels, everything from your neighborhood association to your city council to your county supervisors to your elected officials. In Iowa, we are very fortunate that we have very accessible leaders, right? You probably see them at the grocery store, you run into them at church, or you see them you know, regularly at meetings that you attend. It is up to us to be able to let them know what is important to us so that they can be accurately representing their constituents. And I think that's the responsibility of each of us to take on communicating with our elected officials. Because while they are all powerful, they are not mind readers. So whatever you're into, they should know about it, right? So that skips right to the role of public and citizen groups. Whatever matters to you and your family and your community should matter to your elected official, right? They should know. They should know who you are. You should figure out what email they like to use or what cell phone they will actually pick up when you call. And that's the way that we can talk about this. Because there's a lot of opportunities for us to be able to share what we think about. And figuring out how to best deliver that message and who's most appropriate to deliver that message can definitely be part of the way that you communicate, but it's a way to talk about what it is that's important to you. And then the role of businesses and economics. Now, this is where we're going to get started talking about some more specific projects that are really going on around Iowa that I'm very excited about. And the cool thing about this is there's endless opportunities for business and economics to get involved, because what we're ultimately trying to do is make Iowa a better place to live, work, and play, and attract more people and want them to stay here, right? And so the way that we do some of these projects is happening. So before we talk about what our obstacles are, we're going to talk about all the really fun opportunities that are going on around rivers right now. Now, our organization has been trying to help explain the concept of river restoration for several years. And this is something that is talked about and can be talked about in many different ways. But river restoration is basically, I like the term rewilding, right? We're trying to put them back to what they naturally want to do so that they can work most efficiently. And so when we talk about river restoration, we're looking at models that have gone on in other states, but we're also just trying to allow them to more naturally do things that they want to do. So one thing that our organization has been doing is partnering with the Department of Natural Resources, and they've developed a river restoration toolbox. So these are best practices in river restoration in ways that we can help improve overall stream health, functionality, and also access and recreational opportunities. And so what we've been doing is working with engineers, working with professionals to train them in these natural stream restoration techniques. And these are opportunities to It can be everything from just removing something that is harmful and dangerous, or now we've started to see this wave of potential of recreational opportunities, right? So our group has supported low-head dam mitigation of water trails for a long time because low-head dams are crumbling, infrastructure issues, they're a little bit unsafe. But if we take that out, what are the possibilities that come from that, right? We've removed the direct problem, but what we also can do is create a recreational amenity. So now we've seen small whitewater parks in Iowa popping up in places like Manchester and Charles City. Has anyone ever played in the whitewater parks in Manchester and Charles City? You should totally go. It's really fun. What we did is we took a problem, right? This low-head dam is dangerous, people get hurt, and it's really not doing anything for the community. So instead of just repairing this initial issue, what we're doing is we're turning this into an amenity for the community. Now, to be eligible for this program, you also have to show things like improved fish passage and water quality improvements. But the recreational amenities are boundless. So when we talk about how to bring in businesses and economics, if you've ever, the Charles City project was a whitewater park, an outdoor amphitheater, improved infrastructure for flood mitigation, and a disc golf course. They invested $1.6 million into all of those amenities and are generating about $1 million in economic return from recreation and tourism and camping and kayak rentals and all of these different assets that come along with that. Now we're extrapolating this into this little project that we have planned for Des Moines. So has anyone heard of the Central Iowa Water Trails and Greenways Master Plan? You might not know it by that name, but basically they're talking about building a really fancy whitewater park downtown Des Moines, right through the middle of town, which is very exciting. And this is taking off that exact example, right? The downtown dam is a dangerous dam. It's not really serving a purpose other than it maintains the pool at Birdland and keeps intake levels appropriate for Des Moines Waterworks to be able to treat our water. Both of those things will continue to happen. But what we're looking for is an opportunity to remove this safety hazard, but then also provide this amenity for a community, right? So we want to provide a recreational opportunity. We want to provide tourism opportunities. We want to provide a place for people to play, because most people's relationship in Des Moines with their river is driving over it on their way to work, right? There's also these large cement walls that sort of deter you from wanting to interact with the river. And so how do we change the culture of that around and say, no, this is something that we want you to get in? Now, who has swam in the Des Moines and Raccoon River? I knew there'd be some of you. Yes, we have. And you've all lived to tell the tale, right? I know. So part of this we have to continue to do is an education, right? We know we have water quality issues in Iowa, but what exactly are they and what exactly are the issues around that, right? Manchester is another great example. So in Manchester, they built a whitewater course. There are 5 drops. You can literally put on a life jacket and body surf it, or you can get in a boat and kayak it. It's for all skill levels. And in Manchester, what came out of a Manchester Good to Great committee was this project. So they felt like their community was struggling. They wanted to figure out how to attract people to Manchester, to live there, to revitalize their community. This wasn't originally a river project at all. But what they looked at were their natural assets that they had around the community, and they wanted to re-identify with their river. And so they ended up building this whitewater park. Now there's a brewery across the street, there's rental facilities, there's campgrounds that are full every weekend. But with the Manchester project, they have been really changed the culture around what their community identity is. So now every morning on the radio, especially in the summer, although my friend Hannah Ray J definitely whitewater kayaks when it's icy. So I will say this is actually a year-round activity that you can participate in. But in the summer, the moms would listen on the radio in the morning for what the water levels and speed would be, right? So this is a new thing that they had to teach themselves, right? And as long as they hit that nice marker, okay, it's in the safe zone, the kid's sitting there by the door like, can I go? And they're like, yeah, number's fine, go. And the kids just get to go, right? They can go play in the river all day long. Their moms aren't worried at them because they've relearned this culture around, okay, what are safe levels for the water? It's fine. My kid's good for the day. If it's too high, they can't go out. That's just one example of this culture shift that this community was able to completely embrace, that required a little bit of memorization of numbers, but now their kids have this ultimate playground that they have access to whenever they want. So when we think about culture shifts for different communities around Iowa, as well as this Downtown Des Moines project, we need to think about what this means for all the different communities, right? Figuring out what amenities we want, what we think we want to attract, what we're trying to accomplish with these projects. And now we really are getting the attention of some exciting things for an exciting project. Now Iowa has a history of trails, right? We've embraced our bike trails. We continue to embrace our water trails, and we hope that people see our water trails as an extension of our trail system. They say, and I don't know who they is, but they say that everyone who paddles bikes, but not everyone who bikes paddles. Think about it. So, if we can first combine those two groups, right? These are our trail user groups that are going to want to get out and get active and utilize that. And then, how do we take that even further, right? How do we grow these communities so that they're embracing their resources and figuring out a new way to educate and identify around these natural resources? And I think that's something that our rivers really give us the opportunity to do. We have some amazingly exciting projects on the horizon. And one thing that we continue to talk about as an organization on the advocacy side is, what does a river restoration plan for Iowa look like, right? So we know we want to continue to do this work. We're training engineers to do this work. We know we've got these exciting projects that are happening, but how do we make sure that we're also improving water quality, that we're also improving fish passage and biodiversity for our wildlife? Jen Terry used the word multiple benefits. With every project that we do on any river or stream, if it doesn't have multiple benefits, which is why we don't like bioreactors, it's not probably worth our time, right? Figuring out how to put in the least amount of work for the maximum impact is something we can all get behind. We need to figure out how we can utilize these natural resources to gain multiple benefits. And so that's what groups like ours continue to talk about when we bring people to the table, is yes, this whitewater park could be an amazing opportunity, but what else can we leverage with this as an opportunity to improve? I think the education piece is going to be very important to continue, especially around rivers and water quality, right? Now, when I asked who had swam in the Des Moines and Raccoon River, was anyone's instinct to be like, ugh? Okay, yeah, see, like, be honest, it's fine. Sometimes it's a little bit of what that is, right? So, but better understanding the concerns and how acute or much of a problem they actually could be is good. So, right, real-time bacteria monitoring is really tough. So how do we figure out how to better, maybe we implement a system that's like red, yellow, green. If it's green, go. If it's yellow, we'll see. And if it's red, it probably just rained and maybe you shouldn't be in there right now. Those are the kind of things that we want to think about for like real-life application of what we can do to better inform the public. Again, with issues around water, we have different issues with our drinking water versus water that we recreate in. Our lakes have different issues than our rivers. So figuring out how to continue to collaborate and work together on this is going to be really, really important. So this river restoration plan for Iowa Rivers Revival was fortunate to be a recipient of a grant from REI this year. And one thing that we're trying to figure out is how we can bring groups together to talk about what should a river restoration plan have for Iowa. How do we prioritize how to work in watersheds? How do we prioritize and figure out what size watersheds we need to work on to have maximum impact and multiple benefits? How do we figure out how to collaborate and make sure that we're utilizing our funds in the most resourceful way possible? So one thing that our group is doing to take some leadership in this issue is to bring as many people together around a table as we can to talk about what should a river restoration plan for Iowa include? What does it need to include for farmers, for landowners, for city managers, for public utilities, for some of our more at-risk communities, for some of our more affluent communities? What does it need to have in order to be effective, and how do we administer those funds in ways that's fair and manageable for people? So that's something that we're working on because we want to make sure that all these different communities have access to all these different benefits. So those are the exciting things that are happening. But we have to talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that are in front of us and some of the actions that we can take to help move this forward. So I don't know if you've heard, but there's an election in November. neither of our gubernatorial, John Tack and I were going to pretend to be Kim Reynolds and Fred Hubble instead of my talk, but we didn't think that anyone would fall for it. So one thing that we need to think about with all of these things, and something that we encounter regularly. This is why we get to talk about things like low head dam mitigation and river restoration and fish passage and recreational opportunity, is because those are things that pretty much everyone can get behind, right? But when we start talking about water quality and nutrient reduction and monitoring and voluntary practices, that's when we start getting a little sticky with people, right? But figuring out ways to continue to depoliticize the conversation around water quality is something that our organization has found to be extremely effective. And it's a skill, right? Figuring out how to work effectively with people on both sides does not mean that you are compromising at all ends. It means that you are figuring out ways to communicate with each other and move forward and get things done. And ultimately, that's way more important than being right. Okay, so partisan politics in a nonpartisan issue. Water quality, river restoration, rivers and streams in Iowa. Ultimately, we just want people to be able to utilize and enjoy them. So figuring out how we can continue to depoliticize our conversations and the way that we talk about this is very, very important. Collaboration is very, very important, and coalition building is very important. A lot of us in here represent small nonprofit organizations, and it can sometimes feel like you're competing from everything from funding to resources to individuals. But what we need to be doing is utilizing our teamwork skills, right? And figuring out how people in this room can effectively help each other, how we can figure out what different people are working on and make sure that we're utilizing those opportunities. One thing that we've had really enjoyed being part of is something called we've called ourselves an Iowa Values Messaging Coalition, and figuring out how to come back to sort of the very bare aspect of everything that we're doing is things that we value in Iowa, right? And so how do we make sure we're using shared messaging to show that this is things that we think that are very, very important, and that's why we're willing to work on them and bring people together. The nutrient reduction strategy is something that we're operating under now, but it can't be the only thing that we're operating under, right? We need to continue to look for sustainable funding sources and figuring out ways to continue to measure, monitor, and figure out where we've been and where we need to go. Everything from funding Iowa, I hope everyone who comes up here wants to continue to say that, to training professionals in natural river restoration and supporting entities that help us with this really important research, economic development, nutrient data, things that are going to help us put that real-time data into a practical use. When I'm up at the Capitol and I talk to legislators about stream bank stabilization with native planting techniques, they don't really care. But what they do get excited about is those economic development reports, like the numbers of return that I talked about in Charles City, right? $1.6 million investment generating $1 million a year. Well, that's a good number, right? As we put together these projects, one thing that I would encourage your groups to be working on is figuring out how we can show that economic development data, because that seems to be much more effective when we're communicating with cities, with elected officials, in a way that we can talk to them. So figuring out how you can share that story in a way that we can show that kind of an impact. Now, when we first got started on these projects, we were just excited to have them done. So I called the mayor of Manchester and I was like, okay, what kind of economic data have you guys collected since we built the Whitewater Park? And he's like, well, I go down to the Whitewater Park every weekend and I count license plates from different states. And I was like, okay. So that's it? And he's like, yeah. I have 23 states so far. I was like, okay. I don't think I can use that, but it was a start, and it was a good message for me to think about, okay, so if we're going to continue to do these projects, one thing that we might want to ask these individuals who are going to be eligible, these communities that are going to be eligible for this funding, is how are you going to show the economic development impact data? How are you going to show your recreational use numbers? How are you going to let us know that what we did got a great return on investment, it's working, and people are coming? Right? So if we can figure out too how we can share this message in a way that makes sense, which a lot of times can be dollars and cents or user numbers, can be extremely helpful. So I think that could be a barrier, but I think it's also an opportunity for us to tell our story to people outside of our groups. Now, action plans and things that we can do. Number one is we have to make sure that every opportunity we can, we're getting out of our individual silos, right? We are either in an environmental silos or the ag community, right? We get accused of living in our silos. So figuring out how to work together and tell your story in a way that is applicable to all these other user groups and all these other individuals is extremely important. We need to continue to depoliticize the conversation around water quality and engage with our elected officials. This doesn't have to be up under the Golden Dome, running around in the mid-April stress of the legislative session. And in fact, I would not recommend going up there at that time. Off-season advocacy is my best suggestion for ways that you can interact with your elected officials. Go to city council meetings, join your neighborhood association, figure out how to meet up with your elected official over the summertime when they're in shorts and in a good mood. That is one of the best times to be able to talk to them about the things that are going on in your community. Get more Iowans out on rivers. We do not have this ingrained culture of being river rats anymore, and I think it's a shame. We should all embrace this identity, right? Figuring out when and how it's appropriate and safe to go play in our rivers and streams, and then getting out there and doing it. I used to do environmental education for the County Conservation Board, and there were two activities kids would never stop me and say, like, are we done yet? And it was taking nets out to catch tadpoles and macroinvertebrates in the creeks and fossil hunting. Those are the two that they would do all day long and never ask. So go out with your net, catch tadpoles, and see if you can identify macroinvertebrates in your creek. We need to strengthen and grow our watershed management authorities and the different coalitions and bodies around these that are helping us work better together. And that sustainable funding piece comes in there so much. We're putting a lot of pressure on our watershed management coordinators for 3-year contracts, and it's just ridiculous. They can't go out and make these relationships they need to with landowners in a meaningful way if they have to start looking for a job a year and a half into it, right? Sustainable funding is going to be crucial for those people, and those relationships that they build with landowners sometimes take more than 3 years. We have to get to know these organizations. So I'm getting my thing. I'm going to leave you with a quote that I found recently, and it's about leadership, because I think each of us has the opportunity to be that in our field. So leadership is, someone looks at the world and notices a hole in it. She thinks to herself, this thing, this idea, this service, this kind of person should exist to fill that hole. She waits for a little while thinking about that, and then she stops waiting, and she starts creating the thing herself. She becomes the person she has been waiting for, and she creates the thing she needed. So that's my challenge for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.